meeting. Today is Monday, October 27th, 2025. This meeting is for the purpose of approval of the final 25-26 budget and tax levy. Can we verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. And can we take, Ms. Settinger, to take the roll call, please?
Eric Brooks.
Here.
Natalie Gren. Thomas Harlan.
Here.
Betty Koenig.
Here.
Carrie Kozlowski.
Here.
Diane Voigt. David Wad.
Here.
Anthony Zenobia.
Here.
Kelly Piasek.
Here. And Ms. Gren and Mr. Voigt have asked to be excused for this evening. As I mentioned, we're here tonight to consider the approval of the final 25-26 budget and tax levy. These action items will bring to a close the 12-month budget development process. It should be noted that starting already next month, the district will begin work on the 26-27 budget. The Board of Education welcomes public input throughout the process as we work toward final approval next October. We will begin tonight with a presentation of the final 2025-26 budget and tax levy. I'll hand it over to Mr. Clark, the district's CFO, who will present the recommended budget and levy. Mr. Clark.
All right, thank you. Go over just a few things related to the state budget that I think just about everyone in this room has heard. But then we'll hit into the tax levy and kind of the story behind where we're ending up. And then we'll touch also on our long-term debt and enrollment, because we always talk enrollment. So, but just a few things you should know, and just kind of housekeeping thing. The budget as being presented, it is in compliance with state of Wisconsin revenue limit legislation, and reflects all the recently approved state biennial budget funding provisions. So even after we approved the preliminary budget, more was getting learned about what was in that legislation, and we've applied it in this document. We have completed our third Friday in September pupil count that we are required to do every year, and we are declining again in resident enrollment. Resident enrollment's only a factor in financial matters. Otherwise, we talk about on-site, who's being taught by our staff and in our facilities going forward. But the decline is continuing, and we've talked a lot about that in many conversations this year. Also, the budgeted Fund 39 revenue and expenses I'll call for and allow for SDW to be debt-free on the call date on April 1st of 26. Now, I'll be bringing back documents around the end of the calendar year for you to actually act on the call date, so that'll be forthcoming. State equalization aid declined by 9.17%. We'll go into that in a little more detail here in a few minutes. And then the final tax levy is a 2.21% increase over the previous year. As I mentioned, a new state biennial budget was passed in early July, and I'll just hit on a couple of key provisions I think everyone should be knowledgeable about as we look at our revenues. Revenue limit authority, we're funded and provided revenue limit, the capability to generate revenue on a per student, resident student basis. So last year we were allowed 11,325, and then the 325 revenue limit authority under current legislation goes out 400 or 398 years or whatever we're down to. So that's been factored in as well. So that was a positive outcome based on historical increases in revenue limit authority. The more unique thing about the state budget was there was no increase in what's either called state aid or general aid or equalization aid. They're all the same thing. There was no increase in the funding for that. And what equalization aid does is it lowers your local tax levy. So by increasing our revenue limit authority and not increasing the aid that we are likely to get on a statewide calculation is putting upward pressure on the local tax levy. Special education categorical aid. Obviously, we talk a lot in finance and all of our committees of the board about the growing demand on special education services that our students are requiring. We've actually lobbied quite a bit on this topic, and a significant increase was approved for the 25-26 and 26-27 fiscal years, going from 33% to 42% for this fiscal year, then up to 45% of all eligible costs. That's the number that Madison throws out, and it's based off of budgeted numbers. By the time you apply the actual expenditures that will incur this year, that percentage of reimbursement is always a little lower, so I actually budgeted 39 and 42%. But the increase in our funding in handicap aid or in our Fund 27 was significant by this change in the legislation. Open enrollment's also a positive thing for STW. We have more kids coming in than going out, and that, again, this is a per pupil allocation. That increased sizable too, especially the regular education open enrollment. So it went up from $8,900 to $10,000, and then another jump to $11,030. This also is a big piece of our eAchieve program, and it's eAchieve that really allows us to be positive in our open enrollment. Brick and mortar, we are not positive. With more OE out than in kids.
Darren, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Does that also mean we send out more?
Mr. Wad, can you get your microphone, please?
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify. So we receive more, right, for every student that comes in, to say eAchieve, or from outside the district into one of our brick and mortar schools. But is this the amount that we also will send out?
Yeah, this is revenue and expenses per kid.
Right.
Yep.
So this is only good as long as we're positive on the open enrollment.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
All right, now, talking more specific to STW's budget, as I mentioned, we've completed our third Friday of September pupil count, and this is the history going back to 2008. We topped out in the September of 2012 at 13,143 resident students in the school district of Waukesha. The results of this September's count, we are down to 10,396 students within our boundaries. Again, very close to projections in just that steady, slow decline that we've faced for going on 12, 13 years now. So here's a little closer snapshot of the third Friday count, and these are coming off the district's revenue limit, which is in the budget booklet in board docs if you wanted to go see the numbers. Last year we had 10,617. We projected we'd go down to 10,405, and we actually came in at 10,396. So we feel we have a pretty good handle of where those numbers are. On a percentage basis, we projected and budgeted a 2% decline, and it came in at 2.08% decline. So the good news is the projections were good. The bad news is it continues to drop. So here's our basic funding formula and why, again, why resident enrollment is so critical. You take our 3-year resident enrollment average times that $11,650, and that's what the board's allowed to utilize via state equalization aid and the local property tax levy. The bottom part of the calculation is strictly a taxation question. And what happened is our aid went down, like I said, over 9%, and that put upward pressure on our local tax levy. And we don't find out that aid number in terms of planning until October 15th. So we just found out that number a couple weeks ago, and it puts us in a hard spot because we're 4 months into our fiscal year as we're trying to figure out, we know the amount we're going to be funded, we just don't know the sources of that funding. So I tried to just spend a couple of slides on school funding and why resident enrollment is so critical. And obviously, declines in resident enrollment also drive, they're not directly related, but there's certainly a correlation. The number of kids who are in our schools, and we spent a lot of time talking about on-site enrollment. So this is a very simplified revenue limit calculation. There's a lot more to it than this, but I wanted to show that in 24-25, the third Friday count, we had 10,617 resident kids. We had revenue limit authority of 11,325, which gave us $120.2 million of revenue limit authority. And then I said, boy, what would have happened this year? We're going up to $11,650 per kid if our enrollment would have been the same. And you can see the number, we go up to $123.7 million if resident enrollment would have remained flat. Now, we haven't been flat in years. But then I said, all right, we came in at 10,396 students times the same $11,650. Our revenue limit is $121.1 million. So though the $325 we get an increase for the foreseeable future under current legislation is historically high, the majority of that increased funding goes to offset and make up for the kids you've lost. Because we lost that much revenue that we otherwise would have had. And that's why we go through the right sizing with staff, and now we're talking about our facility footprint, because we need to lower our costs because the revenue just continues to drop at a similar rate. Another funding source that we don't spend a lot of time talking about is per pupil aid, and as the name says, it's aid. We get $742 of aid per pupil. And as that enrollment drops, we also are losing per pupil aid because they didn't change the allocation per student. But we lost 286 kids off of our 3-year rolling average. So we're actually this year losing $212,212. It's a funny number to say. But this is a steady decline again. So why is resident enrollment so important? And why is revenue limit and per pupil aid so important? It represents 86% of our operational revenue, and they're both directly tied to that third Friday count and that decline that we've been facing. Now on, I think, what I consider to be a little brighter note, as I mentioned earlier, we are on pace to pay off all outstanding long-term debt. As the 7th largest school district in the state of Wisconsin, I think that's quite an accomplishment. So the last payment will be April 1st of 2026, assuming we call the call date. And I wanted to give you a little background. When looking at this debt and the tax levy that we needed to do to pay off this debt, our initial plan, and I thought it was very sound, was to establish a nice step down in the levy. So from 24-25 fiscal year down to the fiscal year we're currently in, we had a $5.7 million drop in the levy for debt service. And the thought was that that'll buffer us from the outcome of the state biennial budget. We also had another step that'll occur for the 26-27 when the $2.28 million falls off the levy. So I would like to think we would have a nice levy renewal at that time, but there's no new equalization aid, and we're going to get $325 per pupil. So it'll certainly help address that issue, but I think it's important for people to know that a year ago plus, we were talking about really trying to provide a stable tax levy and maybe even potential declines, but the state biennial budget did not allow for that. So these are the conversations we had. The second column is our levy last year. Equalization aid came at $63.8 million. The levy ended up being $76.3 million. I provided the Finance Committee a draft budget in June just to give them some feeling of where we were at that point in the budget development process. And I said, well, flat aid, that's a fair estimate. And I presented in June to the F&F Committee a 3.65% drop in the total tax levy for the school district. On July 1, DPI is required to provide every school district an estimate of what that upcoming year's aid was going to be. And their estimate was dropping us to 57.9, or roughly $58 million. And you can see there's an inverse relationship. As aid goes down, the levy goes up. So for the preliminary budget, I said I think we're going to have a 3.77% increase in the tax levy. And here's where we ended up. Aid came in very slightly, I forget how much money it was, $30,000 or something, better than we thought, but it was still a 9.17% drop in aid, which caused the tax levy to be better than what was presented at the budget hearing, but still be higher than what we had planned for or necessarily wanted to do, with a 2.21% increase in the property tax levy in 25-26. So here's the breakout of the tax levy calculation. You can see 2 years of history plus what we're asking for action on tonight. We did have a levy decrease last year for 24-25. And it's pretty much equal to what the taxes are going up this year, within a few $100,000. Equalized assessed valuation continues to go way up, a 9.03% growth in the property base of the school district of Waukesha. We do not get more revenue because we have more valuation. Again, our math is how many kids are being served and how many kids are in the school district of Waukesha. One thing, a number I never thought I'd see, and tax rate I don't think is the best measure of taxation, but it's the one most often talked about, I think. We now have below a $5 tax rate, which is unheard of. Now, keep in mind, your house is now worth a lot more than it used to be, so the math kind of works out the same. But the tax rate for whatever value you want to put in that is down 6.26%. Here's all the school districts in Waukesha County on what they're reporting. Us business managers share these numbers of what they're looking at for levy changes. We're at 2.21. We're the lowest increase except for Elmbrook. And you say, well, why is Elmbrook's levy not going up with all this aid moving around? They don't get a lot of aid. So they're kind of immune by big swings in aid. So they never have had the benefit of being a more aided district like SDW is. So for whatever this is worth, there's a lot of things that go into these numbers. There's obviously new referendums. Some districts just lost a lot more in aid than we did. But I thought if you want to look at comparisons, I thought this was a nice, quick summary of where we are compared to our immediate neighbors. So we're a big operation. This is the budget adoption format. It's in the booklet that's in board docs. Breaking down the two funds that most people talk about is our general fund, which is operational. It's everything non-special ed that you think about as a school, a teacher, desks, light, heating the building, busing the kids to and from school. So we are looking at total revenue of $216,602,674 and total expenditures of $227,454,929, easy for me to say, for the 25-26 school year. So I can answer any.
Now would be the time if there's any questions, and then I can walk you through what actions we need to take. Mr. Wad?
Well, so I guess I'm just checking in. So I have comments to make. I don't necessarily have questions. I was going to save that for once the motion is made. Of
course.
You have a preference?
And that's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Mr. Harland?
Darren, could you kind of, I guess it's the number that from the state has changed a number of times. I think even yet this week and potentially today. Is that correct that there's still been changes ongoing all the way up through today?
Not on the equalization aid, but there has been small adjustments to the revenue limit. Actually, DPI posted, I think it was at 9:18 this morning. We didn't have any changes, but we had a change last Friday of one kid that was added. So the flow of information, that's why we were a little late getting our documents out, was I knew as soon as I sent something, there'd be one student, right? And is that material? No, but we should max out and go with what the information is. So after today, when boards act, I'm not going to say everyone's acting today on their final numbers. Those numbers are locked in, and I would like to think DPI is done as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, actually, I do have a couple of quick questions. So as we talk about state aid, right, we see some districts every year getting more, some districts getting less in state aid. I just want to confirm that when we see, or let me back up, the formula bases state aid on how much revenue the district generates, correct? Or receives?
The aid formula is based off of three factors: enrollment,
Right,
property valuation behind each student,
right.
and then expenditures.
Okay, so Yeah, okay, so expenditures. So if.
They're
a-
tied to revenues, obviously.
Right. So I just want to confirm, if a school district were to pass a massive referendum and increase their expenses, that will impact positively for that district the amount of state aid they get, or may, depending upon their equalization value of their property. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yeah, if you're a positively aided school district and you pass a referendum, you'll get more aid than you otherwise would have.
Just for passing the referendum.
Directly tied to that, because you're impacting the expenditure side of the equation, right?
And state aid, at least this year compared to last year, it's a zero-sum game, right? So since there's no more additional state aid, when one school district gets more as a result of passing a referendum than a district that didn't pass a referendum and their equalized values remain either the same or perhaps get higher compared to the lower EOA district, they are essentially getting taxed by the people who passed that referendum, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So we have a two-step process tonight. First, we need to take action on the budget itself, and then we will need to take action on the levy. So do you want to take it from here? I'll hand it over to Mrs. Kozlowski, who's the board treasurer.
I move to approve the 2025-2026 budget as presented with $216,602,674 in total revenues and $227,454,929 in total expenditures, including a $21,255,113 required operating transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 per the Department of Public Instruction's accounting guidelines.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? Just of note, maybe as a reminder, I would like to comment that over $21 million is being transferred from our general fund to our special education fund. And while we're seeing notable increases in the special education reimbursement, that is also effectively eclipsed by the change in state aid. And so we're finding ourselves in a more unfavorable budget position. But that's a significant amount because, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 20% of our students right now are requiring special education services. Slightly under 20%. Okay. Any other comments? Mrs. Ettinger, would you take the roll call, please?
Carrie Kozlowski.
Aye.
David Wad.
Aye.
Betty Koenig.
Aye.
Eric Brooks.
Aye.
Anthony Zenobia.
Aye.
Thomas Harlan.
Aye.
Kelly Passick.
Aye. Passes 7-0. Moving on to the approval of the operational capital expansion, community service, and debt service tax levy. And Mr. Clark presented the details of that, so I'll turn it back over to Mrs. Kozlowski.
I move to approve the final 2025-2026 tax levy in the amount of $81,142,894.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Koenig. Any comments? Mr. Wad?
Thank you. So I just think, and I've spoken about this before at finance, but now that we're voting on this final levy, I think it is critical that we get this information on the record. As Mr. Clark pointed out, when we first embarked on our plan for this budget, the management, the wise management and stewarding of our funds, the management of referendum debt, led us to believe that we were going to be looking at a nearly $2.8 million reduction in the levy, the second straight year that we would have been reducing property taxes for the residents of the school district of Waukesha, representing a 3.65% increase. We also heard Mr. Clark tell us that we found out just weeks after that that due to calculations that DPI doesn't even estimate until we are into our current fiscal year, and I will also point out that we're now, what, a quarter and a half, almost 2 quarters into our fiscal year, which means we have no opportunity to respond to these sorts of changes when they occur because our fiscal year is already underway. We learned that we were going to be losing $5,854,000 in state aid compared to last year. So the question becomes, why does that happen? What changed between last year and this year, or between June and where we're at today? And the reality is, it has to do with the ridiculous way in which the state makes determinations about the amount of state aid that every district gets. My biggest complaint, and I mean, it would take weeks to go through a course to teach people how to figure out the funding of education in Wisconsin. But at the highest level, here's what we know. As I asked Mr. Clark, if a school district passes a referendum, does that mean, as a result of their expenses being higher, they're going to be eligible for an increase in state aid? And the answer was yes. The school district, or the Milwaukee Public School District, is seeing a $104.9 million increase in their state aid just this year. $104.9 million. Zero-sum game. That means that $104 million that Milwaukee is getting as a result of passing a referendum 2 years ago that increased their ability to tax their residents above the revenue limit means that every one of the residents of the school district of Waukesha will pay more as a result of the levy we're going to have to pass in order to balance our budget tonight, to the tune of $563 per student. The residents of Milwaukee were allowed to tax the school district of Waukesha residents $563 per student. I will remind people that at that time, Milwaukee did not have their financial reporting done, and in fact, were years behind. And the Department of Public Instruction didn't have the common decency to tell the residents of the city of Milwaukee that they were doing it, let alone the common decency to tell the citizens of the state. Over 300 school districts will see a reduction in state aid this year. Waukesha is the 4th largest of those 300. Only 100 school districts will see an increase. Of the 100 school districts that are seeing an increase of about $188 million, $104 million of that is going to MPS alone. That represents 56% of the additional state aid that is being sent to districts that are getting an increase are going to Milwaukee. In the meantime, our taxpayers are taking a $6 million hit. So the first thing I want to make sure that the taxpayers of this district recognize is there is nobody at this table who feels good about passing a levy increase. But we're boxed in. We're halfway into the year. DPI doesn't even tell us until July, and even those numbers in July were wrong. They changed again. The estimate for the amount of money that Milwaukee was going to get in additional state aid increased by another $35 million roughly from July until, what, this morning? Yesterday, whenever it was that they updated it? So, from this point forward, at least when I'm talking about this levy increase this year, I'm labeling the MPS levy increase. MPS, their referendum, and the residents that voted for that referendum in Milwaukee increased the taxes for the residents of the school district of Waukesha. They would have gotten a tax increase. Instead, they're getting a tax increase. And it has nothing to do with this board except the fact that we have to pass a levy to be able to pay for our services, to pay for our staff, and to keep the district operating in the middle of a fiscal year. I also want to point out that this is not something that's going to be a one-time event. There are a number of other school districts that have passed massive referendums in the past couple of years. I think Racine passed one of $100 million, increasing their operating revenue. Madison, I think, was close to $600 million, which was both a one-time operational borrowing plus $100 million maybe in additional revenue for above the revenue limit. So this is going to be a problem that we're going to have to face every year, and we're probably going to have to look at how we do our budgeting. We made a mistake not knowing that we were going to see this kind of a change, but we probably should start estimating that we're going to get less in state aid by some percentage every year when we do our budgeting. So the reason I bring this up is, number one, now that we know that what other voters do in other districts has a direct impact on the amount we have to tax our taxpayers in order to keep our budget balanced, we need to start demanding from our legislators that they fix this. 300 districts, 75% of the districts in this state are being held hostage to referendums like the ones being held in Milwaukee and Madison. Our legislators need to find a way to stop rewarding districts that pass massive referendums because it impacts massive amounts of citizens elsewhere in the state. And the second thing that we need to start coming to terms with is, while we aren't in a crisis now, the fact of the matter is, because it is an unreliable way of estimating how much money we're going to have year over year, and given the rate at which referendums have been passed in this state and the volume, the structural deficit that we're hoping to be able to start curbing through our optimization efforts so that we can get ahead of the curve instead of having to react with draconian cuts should they become necessary, will become a crisis a lot faster if we don't start acting sooner. So I say this because we have a lot of people in this community who are demanding that we just stop. And we stop talking about what we need to do to make our district run more efficiently and keep our budget balanced. I'm sorry, we don't have that option. If we're going to stay ahead of the curve and we are going to plan accordingly, we have got to be smart in how we do this, and it starts with making decisions that we know are going to be better for the budget in the long run and keep us out of a crisis, which we're going to get to a lot faster than I think people thought a couple months ago. And the final thing I'll say on this, it would be nice if some of our local journalists would take the time to understand this and report to the residents that read their newspapers. And I'm talking about the Waukesha Freeman and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, though I'm not very confident we'll get much help from the Journal-Sentinel, given the light this paints Milwaukee in, to start researching this and start reporting the impacts, not just of what referendums do to districts all over the state, including what it's doing to Waukesha the school district of Waukesha, but to the taxpayers in those areas. And perhaps starting to put some attention on this so that legislators start getting the message from their constituents they need to fix the funding problem that we have that results from these massive referendums getting passed and passing along tax increases to unwitting citizens in other communities.
Mr. Brooks.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Watt hit a lot of the points that I had as well. I mean, he's exactly right. Nobody at this table wants to sit here and vote on a budget that's going to increase the levy, especially when we were sitting here several months ago thinking it would be going in the opposite direction. Full transparency, wasn't sure how I was going to vote on this budget until I got to this boardroom today. I voted yes and will vote yes on this because I think despite the circumstances, this is the best budget that we have an opportunity to pass right now. And I commend Mr. Clark and Mrs. Kozlowski and the Finance Committee for their work on this because it is tough, especially just given the differing timeframes of how we operate versus when we get aid calculations from the state. It makes it really, really difficult to budget. It's a shame that we are effectively held hostage by a funding formula that rewards irresponsible school districts and punishes districts that are doing the right thing for their taxpayers. Mr. Watt talked about the MPS referendum. We've talked about this ad nauseum. It's a huge problem, but you look at where they're spending that money too. They're not getting results out of it. A lot of people like to talk about school funding in the sense of it's just more money for schools. If we just keep pumping more money into schools, we're going to get better results. In some school districts that are wise with their money, that may be the case. We talked about our per pupil limit here in Waukesha. MPS, when you factor in both state, federal, and local dollars, their per pupil is close to about $25,000 a kid. They have some of the worst reading scores in the country, not just the state, in the country, especially for Black and Hispanic students. I think it's about 5% of Black fourth graders in Milwaukee can read at grade level. $25,000 per kid, and that's the result they're getting. There are districts across this country where their special needs population or their native Spanish-speaking population is reading at a higher proficiency rate than Black fourth graders in Milwaukee who are native English speakers. $25,000 per kid. That's what they're getting out of it. We do a great job here in the school district of Waukesha of making every dollar that we have count, making sure that we are investing in proven quality curriculum where we're actually seeing gains, for the most part, in our reading and math scores. And as we've been talking about and will continue to talk about with optimizing the future, making sure that we are maximizing the dollars in our facility footprint while still being able to fund and support programs that are essential to our students, whether it's special ed support, dual language, all these programs that make our district so functional and just popular for a lot of families and meet their needs. When districts go into crisis mode, those are the programs that often get cut first, right? Because we don't have to offer dual language. We don't have to offer STEM. Those are the extras that we like to offer for our students because we think it serves a purpose and it meets the needs of our community. And so as Mr. Wad pointed out, when we're talking about the conversations both here in the budget meeting but also in our optimizing our future meetings, we are making these decisions, which are very tough, and I understand they're very difficult for a lot of community members. But we are making them so that we can preserve these programs going forward, not so that we have to come back in a year or two and say, the sky's falling, what can we cut? And do what a lot of other districts do, which is cut the popular programs. I mean, you look at Wauwatosa, they're one of the best schools in the state was their STEM program. They got rid of it. We want to make sure that we can continue offering these successful programs for our kids and for our families in this community. And that means that we need to make the important but challenging decisions right now that are before us.
Does anyone else have a comment? Can you keep it brief?
Yes. There was one key thing that I wanted to point out, and Mr. Brooks got right on the cusp of it, but I want to finish the thought. We pride ourselves on our fiscal responsibility, living within our means and continuing to offer the services and education to our students that we do. We are seeing value from what we're investing, and the thanks we get is to get basically a $5 million tax bill from MPS with the results they get. The worst-run district in the state is getting $100 million extra on top of the $250 million they're going to get extra on their taxpayers, and our taxpayers are biting the bullet despite our best efforts to provide the fiscal responsibility. And we saw it on the chart. We have the lowest tax rate, and we had the lowest increase except Elmbrook, who, by the way, got one of the largest increases in state aid after you take Milwaukee into the equation. So I think it's important for us to keep these things in mind, too, when we consider what we're going to vote on here.
Okay, thank you. We do have an action that was seconded, and so unless there are any further comments, we'll move to a vote. Mrs. Ettinger, would you take the roll call, please?
Anthony Zenobia,
Aye.
Eric Brooks.
Aye.
Carrie Kozlowski.
Aye.
Thomas Harlan.
Aye.
Betty Koenig.
Aye.
David Wad.
Aye.
Kelly Piasek.
Aye, passes 7-0. All right, thank you, everyone. That adjourns our budget meeting for this evening. We'll take about a 10-minute break, and we will reconvene with our board workshop. Thank you.